Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Agrifood Conversations, brought to you by iSelect Fund, the Van Trump Report, and the Yield Lab Institute. My name is Tom Bunn, an associate on the iSelect Fund team. Agrifood Conversations is all about driving innovation in agriculture. Each month, we highlight a specific theme, including emerging topics such as soil health, plant genetics, vertical farming, and aquaculture. This month's theme is cellular agriculture, and today we are joined by Benjamina, co-founder and CEO at Higher Stakes. Using state-of-the-art cell culture techniques, Higher Stakes is growing high-quality meats using just small samples of animal cells, feeding them a rich and animal-free growth media. The meats created using this technology do not require the use of any antibiotics and are produced under clean conditions, reducing the risk of food-borne diseases, and a single blood sample could allow indefinite production of many meat products. Even more, cell-based meat has the potential to reduce CO2 emissions and land and water usage. Before we get started, a few process comments. Each of you knows companies are more likely to succeed with the right network of customers, talent, investors, and advisors. We have invited you to this call because you are some of the smartest and most talented people in Higher Stakes market. You are potential customers for their products. You built and sold a company in the agri-food industry, or you are a sophisticated business person or agri-food professional who understands the market and the challenges Higher Stakes may face. We are not soliciting investment. This presentation is to provide information about Higher Stakes products and services to help them find customers, mentors, or other strategic relationships that can help them grow their business. You are all also on mute. However, you can use the chat window to ask a question. After the formal part of the presentation, we will answer as many questions as time allows. If you so choose to want to speak your question to Benjamina, I can unmute you if you raise your hand, and you can ask away. Finally, this presentation is being recorded and will be available for replay. So without further delay, I'm pleased to introduce Benjamina Boag, CEO and founder of Higher Stakes. Take it away, Benjamina.
Thank you. Yeah. I did some marketing work with companies. Work department with expertise, 10 years of experience in their respective field. And advanced development and pharma and biologic. Increasing, and we're going to be 10 billion strong by 2050. It's going to double again as. Can you hear me properly?
Benjamina, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Sounds like your connection may be not great, or ours.
Let me try.
Benjamina, it may help if you dial in with the phone instead of using your computer for the audio portion.
Hello?
Benjamina, can you hear me?
Hello? Yes,
Hello, can you
I
hear
can
me?
hear you.
It may make sense if you
Can you
dial
hear
in
me
with your
better now?
phone and that sounds a little better, yeah.
Okay.
It may make sense for you to dial in with your phone
Okay.
though. We find we get better connectivity with your phone, but keep the audio or the video, the visuals on your computer. Apologies, everyone. We hope to be up and running in just a moment.
Hello? Is it better now?
Yeah, this sounds much better.
Okay, I'm not with my phone, but it seems to go okay. I'm really sorry about this.
No problem. Do you mind taking it from the top?
Yeah, sure. Ooh, what did I do? Sorry. Sorry. Sorry, everyone. Um, great. So, I'll go through quickly through my background and the rest of the team. So my background's in chemical engineering, did some work in 3D printing, fragrance and flavoring, did some marketing work with PepsiCo, then had a small startup selling to FTSE 500 companies. My co-founder and the CSO of the company, so Chief Scientific Officer, has a PhD in modeling Alzheimer's disease using the same type of cells as we're using today, worked in biotech startups as well. Working with Professor Hay, who is the chair of the tissue engineering department at the University of Edinburgh, and our two senior scientists, so Dr. Simon Patridge, who's our biomaterial scientist, and Dr. Ruth Aram, both with over 10 years of experience in their respective field. With our team of advisors in bioprocess, muscle differentiation, business development, and pharma and biologics. So the world population is increasing at a rapid pace, and we're going to be more than 10 billion by 2050. And we're eating more meat than ever before. In fact, our meat consumption has doubled in the last 50 years, and it's going to double again by 2050. And this is not something that we can sustain for many reasons. Since one of the reasons is that we don't have enough land. So we only have 70% of land that's habitable, and we're already using 40% of it for livestock. So even if we wanted to meet that demand, we can't. And that's just one of the many reasons we have water usage, CO2 emissions, antibiotic resistance, and much more. So there's a few things that we can do. We can slow down population growth and eat less meat. Two things that are unlikely to happen in the time frame that we need, or we can innovate. And we've seen a lot of innovation come in really, I mean, the last few years, but this year has shot up a lot. We've seen Nestle, Burger King, Tyson all launching new products, but all of these are in the plant-based fields. And while there's still, good replacement and they're getting better by the day, people still want real meat. And actually, when we surveyed people, we found that over 50% of meat eaters rather switch to cell-based meat rather than go to plant-based or keep their current diets. So higher stakes, we're making meat that's the same down to the molecular level. And the way it works is that we take a small sample of cells from the animal, in our case, a pig. So this can be a blood sample or a small skin patch. We then reprogram the cells to become induced pluripotent stem cells. So if you want, in nature, you have two main types of cells. You have embryonic stem cells and adult stem cells. And this is a way of taking any cell in the body and bringing back to the embryonic state. What that means is that you can expand them pretty much infinitely, and you can make any type of tissue from it. This is a technology that won the Nobel Prize back in 2012 by a professor called Yamanaka. Once you have those cells, you expand them, and you can differentiate them into different types of cells, such as muscle or fat. I've been told by Susan that you can't see my screen. Can you not see my screen?
We can see your screen, but the slides are not moving forward.
Which slide is it?
We can see your screen, but the slides are not moving.
Which slide is it on?
We're on current solutions alone, can't meet this demand.
Oh, because I'm on how we do it. Can you see now?
No, not yet.
Not sure what's going on. Should I restart it? Can you not see my screen moving? Oh, show my screen. Here we go. Great.
Try going forward now.
I think now it will work. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Now we got it.
Sorry. Thank you, Susan, for letting me know. So once we have those induced pluripotent stem cells, we expand them in a liquid called the media. So that's the nutrient for the cells. And we then push them to become muscle, fat, and different types of tissue. And either we grow them all on something called the scaffold, or we then reassemble them to form a sausage and process them in a way like you would typically process a sausage. So there's a reason that this is none of you have probably tried this yet, and this is not in the supermarket, is because there's still some technical challenges that we need to overcome. The first one is the cost. This is mainly coming from the media, so that liquid to feed the cells. The second is the consistency and efficiency. So this is something that people talk less about, but is very important, because if you want a production line, you can't have a product that's non-consistent and that's not the same over and over again, especially with stem cells, where sometimes you'll look at them funny and they'll turn into neurons rather than muscle. So you need a system that's very controlled. The third is really to differentiate ourselves from plant-based meat and to really compete in a better way with conventional meat, we need to start working on structured cuts of meat. So start already working towards even, bacon, chicken breast, and so on before moving to the even more complex like steak. So to address those challenges, there's different decisions that people need to make. The first is which cell source. So I mentioned induced pluripotent stem cells, which are the cells that we're using. So they're often called iPSCs, as you can see here. But there are other types of cells. So adult stem cells is the one that most of our competitors use. But also when you're working with chicken, for example, it's quite easy to work with embryonic stem cells because it comes from the egg, whereas with pork, there's probably 2 or 3 people in the whole world that are able to get embryonic stem cells from pork. You then push them down the lineage to, as you can see, become the type of cell that you want. So in our case, we'll mostly want skeletal muscle cells and fat cells. So the media is the most expensive part of the process. And part of it is the basal media, which is the kind of basic nutrients and is quite easy to make it cheap. The other one is the growth factors and small molecules. So those are horrifically expensive. You're looking at $400 for a few milligrams. So this is the big challenge. So people are looking at different aspects. So either they're looking at making them cheaper by making them food grade rather than pharma grade. Other people are looking at recycling, including ourselves. People are looking at modifying the growth factors or looking at completely getting rid of growth factors. So for example, if you use genetic engineering, you can completely get rid of those growth factors, which are the proteins really directing the cells. You grow all this in something called a bioreactor. So if you've ever seen a brewery, it looks a lot like that from the outside, slightly different on the inside. And it can take many forms. The one that's most commonly used is a stir tank bioreactor, which is basically just a tank with something stirring in the middle. So that's the most simple one. So it's kind of like the one you can see on the bottom right-hand side. But there's different ways, and this is a good way of increasing the efficiency of our products. So rather than just thinking, how can we make the media cheaper, we can also think, how can we make a maximum of quantity of product with the minimum amount of media. And that's also where the recycling comes in. The other part is the scaffolding. So with the scaffolding, people have done, as you can see, a spinach leaf. So they've grown cells on spinach leaves. Other people like ourselves are using gels. And really, you can modify that structure. And that helps your cells grow in a better way. If you're just growing cells in 2D, it's going to be very, in 2 dimensions, it's going to be very difficult to get the quantities that we need. And also, if you don't have the right scaffolding, you can, for example, you'll get cell death in the middle. So you won't get all the cells to properly become muscle and fat and resemble the product that you need. So on top of the technical challenges, we have a few other challenges. So the first is labeling. You probably have heard people call it cell-based meat, clean meat, cultivated meat more recently, and some people call it still cultured meat. So quite a few labels. There's been a lot of controversy on the word clean meat. So this is one that's unlikely going to be regulated, but it's also going to be around what the regulators want from us. In terms of regulations, so it's different in different countries, but it's still quite unclear. So in Europe, so we're based in the UK, and in the UK and in the rest of Europe, we go through the novel food regulation. So the novel food regulation is a regulation that takes around 18 months, where you prove to the regulators that your product is safe. So it's quite a flexible regulation, where really we have to walk them through a process and explain why in each part why is our product safe and why it's going to be okay for the consumer and why it's either equal or better than the current alternatives. In the US, it's the FDA and USDA that jointly regulate. So the FDA does the upstream processing, meaning they do everything up until really we have a bunch of cells together, and the USDA do the downstream processing. So they'll be looking at labeling and things like that. Other than that, Singapore is working right now quite hard on getting some regulations together. So is Australia. And in the other parts of the world, it's still quite unclear. The other one is capital. So by capital, it's really because it's CapEx intensive to actually grow, make our meat and make our products. So really for all of us to be able to reach the amount, the size of market that we want and be able to compete with conventional meat, it will require a lot of capital, which is a challenge. And the last but not least is customer acceptance. So at the moment it's quite high. We've seen surveys ranging between 11% to 70% of people that said they would either switch to cell-based meat or at least try it. But this is something that can change, and until we have consumers actually going to the shop and buying it, this is still something that's uncertain. So in our case, we're working specifically with pork, and there are a few challenges that are specific to pork. So first is that it's a low-cost product in most parts of the world. So in the UK, it's quite high when you're looking at organic minced meat. So it's quite similar to beef. But when you're looking at the more cut size, or when you're looking at prices, obviously in places like China, that's a big part of the market. The product costs are really low, so challenging to get to. The second is obtaining pluripotent stem cells. So pluripotent stem cells are either embryonic stem cells or iPSC, so the type of cell that we're using. And it's more difficult than with, for example, chicken, where, as I mentioned, you could get it from the egg. The third is religion. So I often get asked whether this will be kosher or halal, which excludes some part of the world, I guess, for us to go to, but still, essentially, pork is the most widely consumed meat, and therefore it's really the one that we've decided to go with. On top of that is the largest use of antibiotics. So around 70% of the antibiotics that are used on animals, and a lot of them are used on pork, principally as well in China. And for those of you who don't know, antibiotic is a major threat. So the World Health Organization expects it to kill more people than cancer by 2050. So this is mostly through antibiotic resistant diseases. On top of that, there's a massive shortage at the moment. So there's the African swine fever that's killing a lot of the pigs in China, but also in Europe, it's hit already 10 countries, meaning that as demand is shooting up, and supply is really under threat, it gives us an opportunity to take more of the market. Other than that, there's a lot of processed product that we can start with, which are easier to start with than a steak. So pork chops, as you can see, is only about 10%, and this is really the hardest part. Having something like a sausage or bacon is a lot easier to make from a technical perspective. So one of the other reasons we chose pork is because there's a lot less competition. So this is a bit what the industry looks like and kind of the firms that funded it and so on. But kind of going into really cell-based meat landscape. So these are not all the companies. These are the most famous ones. Today, there's around 40 companies that are there. But kind of running through them, there's Memphis Meat, Mission Barns, and Just that are doing just general meat. But with pork, there's only 3 of us at the moment. So there's New Age Meats in the US, Fork and Good as well in the US on the East Coast and ourselves. And then you have a couple of people doing beef, chicken, fish, and so on. And within fish, some are doing salmon, tuna, and all of that. So I talked a lot about the challenges, but really each challenge is also an opportunity. And with cell-based meat, we're creating a whole new supply chain, which means that there will be a lot of opportunities for people to support us. So that's me, and happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Benjamina. To those in attendance, please feel free to ask a question in the question pane or raise your hand and I can unmute you. Looks like John Crawford may have a question. John, I will unmute you. Looks like he's not dialed in. Benjamina, in the meantime, so you mentioned those challenges. They all seem pretty hefty. Which one is keeping you up the most at night?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge that we see is really putting the fact that there's so many challenges and that they all have to come together. Essentially, if you're only solving, for example, the tech and ignoring regulation on the consumer, then it becomes, quite a lot easier. If you really look within the tech, and if you can have a system, you can have a way of differentiating the cells that works really well. But when you try and scaling up in the bioreactor or putting on the biomaterial, it doesn't work. So it's really the fact that all these pieces need to come together, and the challenge of doing that's keeping me up at night, I would say. On top of that is really choosing within all the possible technologies that we can take, all the possible routes to solving these challenges, and really choosing which ones are the good ones. We're pretty confident on our current methods, but it's still a challenge.
Got it. Thank you. So John Crawford typed in a question. He asks, he says his question is about cost and how big the gap is right now. How big the gap is between cell-based and traditional.
Still quite big. So I would say the lowest cost that we've seen anyone prove on more than paper is in the few hundreds per kilogram, which is over 10 times conventional meat. If you're looking at organic meat, probably 100 times if you're looking at really the low cost meat. So it's still quite high up. But we've gone a long way. So initially, when Mark Post did the first burger back in 2013, it cost $300,000 per one burger, which was about $1 million per kilogram. So we've gone a long way, but it's still challenging, and it's really, again, about balancing the cost, but also making technologies that we know will scale, because you can have the lowest cost possible, but if you put a bunch of cells and they won't grow when you put them in a 10,000 liter or 100,000 liter bioreactor, then you really have a problem, and it's going to be very challenging to actually produce millions of kilograms.
Got it. Thank you. Jeff Mukow, sorry if I mispronounced your name, Muchow, asks, how do you evaluate the prospects for plant-based proteins and their long-term potential to take market share from meats and eventually cell-based meats?
I quite like the estimates that A.T. Kearney gave, where they predicted that cell-based meat will take around 35% of the market, plant-based 25%, and conventional meat 40%, and that would be by 2040. I personally believe that it's realistic. I think it will take a long time for alternative proteins in general to, take over the whole meat market, and I think it will stay in a smaller quantity for a while. I think there will be people that prefer plant-based. There will be people that might prefer insect, and there will be people that prefer cell-based meat. Obviously, I'm biased and believe that cell-based meat is a better solution, but I think plant-based meat does have its advantages, and it will appeal more to the people that are vegetarian or that already eat less meat.
Great, thank you. Soren Schroeder asks, do you know what scale you need to be able to compete at even price to natural pork, and what capital investment would be required?
So when you're talking about natural pork has quite different prices depending on the cut, where it is in the world, and whether it's organic or not. To be with organic, we're looking at making to be price parity around 1 million kilograms. In terms of capital cost, if we have to start a factory from scratch, we're looking at hundreds of millions. But we're trying to work out how much of existing kind of pharma and biotech solutions we can use, and bioreactors that are already there, or factories, for example, Lanza's factories and things like that we can already use in order to scale up.
Great, thank you. Alan Felton asks, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No, and then obviously the more modular you can make it, the easier it is. So you're seeing even pharma move away from those kind of 500 million plants commitment, and trying to see how much can we get a space where we can have one small, maybe 1,000 to 10,000 liter bioreactor, and then have quite a few of those rather than having one massive one that costs a lot more.
Great. Alan Felton asks, are you planning, or do you have a pilot plant that proves your concept?
So we're planning on it. We're looking to start it in really about a year. So right now we're still working on fully developing our technologies, and hope to prove them at around 1,000 liter scale starting in a year, and that will last around a year and a half or so. We know Future Meat, who are a company in Israel, are now looking to start their pilot plant, and I think they're the only ones that have at least publicly said it.
Great. Christian Newton asks, would you please discuss the challenges and opportunities specifically around scaffolding for cell-based meats, i.e. types, scale, and effect on end product?
Sure. I'll discuss what I can. If you're interested in learning more about what we specifically do feel free to reach out to me on the email. I unfortunately can't talk about it publicly. I mean, the main challenges is, again, it has to be cheap. So a lot of the really good scaffolds that come from the biomedical sector are expensive as well. So if you're adding a scaffold that's expensive, it's not going to help with your product. You have to have something that's quite easy to pour in a way. So you want ideally something that you can just pour in your bioreactor rather than having to 3D print it or things like that. Dependent as little as possible really on other technologies. You need to find a way to either have something that degrades. So either you want your material to completely degrade, and even in that case, you'll want it to be non-toxic, just because things rarely, 100% degrade. Or you'll want it to be something that people can eat. So a lot of people, for example, are growing it on mycelium or collagen or soy or things like that, because then these are things that people can already consume. Whereas if you're talking more synthetic materials, then some of the synthetic materials people already consume, some not. One of the most common ones would be alginate. So this is from algae and often done as hydrogel, which again, alginate as an idea is very simple, but you can then use that and modify it to really be precisely perfect for your own protocol. So you could add things to it and change that. Hopefully that answers. It's quite difficult to answer without saying anything proprietary, but happy to discuss this further.
Sure. Thank you, Benjamina. Any other questions from the attendees? Well, while the last people are perhaps deliberating on their questions, Benjamina, is there a way for anybody to get a hold of you if they want
so
to
if
follow
you can
up?
see my screen, there's my email at the bottom right.
Great.
So
Thank you.
happy to answer any questions and go more in detail on kind of what we're specifically as well doing. I apologize because it's public. There's a lot of things that I couldn't go through, but hopefully it gave you a better idea of the sector.
No, it was great. We appreciate you taking the time today. As a reminder to everyone in attendance, we host these calls every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central. You can register for them by going to agrifoodconversations.com, and a replay of this webinar will be emailed to you in the next 24 hours. So if you know others that may want to see this webinar in replay, they can register on the original webinar link to gain access. So thank you again, everybody, for your time. Thank you, Benjamina. Very interesting. And we will hopefully see you next Thursday.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.